I'm Lori Rader-Day, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Doctorow,
Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Lori Rader-Day.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to Author Stories. I am your host, Hank Garner. You can find all of the archives of the show at hankgarner.com. And while you're there, please click on the subscribe links over in the right-hand sidebar. You can subscribe on your Android phone, your iPhone, it's Stitcher Radio. Anywhere that you listen to podcasts, you can find Author Stories. We're also on YouTube. There's a link over in the right-hand sidebar as well. And you can subscribe there and never miss an episode. Today's episode is sponsored by the AIPP, the Association of Independent Publishing Professionals. If you are an indie author and you need to build a support team to help you format your book, edit your book, get a cover designed for your book, anything that an indie author needs to get their book out there, the AIPP has a member that can help you make your book, your product, the very best it can be. If you look in the show notes at the bottom of this episode, you'll find a link to the AIPP, or go to aipponline.org/members and browse through the member library and find the professional to fill out your team. Like I said, anything that you need to make your indie publishing journey a success, there's a member there to help. It's a very simple website, very easy to navigate through. Go check out aipponline.org/members today and fill out your indie author team. At the end of the show, be sure to stick around for an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Thanks for listening. He enlisted for the money. He stayed for the girl. Gateway to the Galaxy, the new series everyone is talking about, beginning with Book 1, Into the Breach. Frank and Marine Space Corps 1 find themselves across the galaxy in a WWE smackdown with the legions of a boss-level villain. But the party's just getting started. He donned the mantle of a celestial knight to impress a girl, well, an empress. Now destiny's calling in a debt. A lightning-paced military fantasy full of outlandish comedy and impossible situations that will have you hailing for these Marines from the get-go. For fans of Green Lantern and the Stargate universe. Listen to what some readers are saying. This is good stuff. Thanks for the new obsession. I recommend and can't wait for the next book. And the visual pictures and action are amazing. They're getting the band back together. And this time, it's serious nonsense. Pick up the Gateway to the Galaxy series by Jonathan Yanez and J.R. Castle, available now on Amazon.com. There's a link to it in the show notes. Gateway to the Galaxy. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Lori Rader-Day on the show with me. She has a phenomenal new book called Under a Dark Sky. I believe this is her fourth. Is it your fourth, Lori, mystery?
It is my fourth book, yes.
Yeah, and guys, this book is phenomenal. If you're a big mystery fan like I am, you are really going to love this book. So welcome to the show, Lori.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to have you. We begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Okay, I know this one. This is tough, but I know it.
Do you need to phone a friend?
When I don't have to call anybody. I know this one. When I was 6 or 7 years old, I remember sort of noticing for the first time that these books that I liked had a name on the cover that was not the character name. It was somebody else's name. And I realized this is the person who's writing these stories, and I decided, well, I was someone, maybe I could write a story. The books I liked at the time were the Ramona Quimby series.
Yeah.
I love Beverly Cleary, and love, present tense. And I decided I was going to write my own Ramona story. So I'm 6 or 7 trying to write my very first story. I didn't get very far, not very far at all. But I definitely remember trying that and showing it to a friend of mine and realizing, okay, you just put words down on paper. That's easy. It wasn't.
Yeah. I've heard a similar story to that from several different people that before that moment of awakening, that we just assumed that books were just magic and they just came from somewhere. Mm-hmm. And when you put a human name on it and say, oh, a person did this, that means I can do it. That is, everyone doesn't have that experience, but when, there's a special person that says, oh, if somebody else did it, then obviously I can do it. And then you just go about doing it. After that, Ramona Quimby, awakening, did you keep writing after, you were writing Beverly Cleary fan fiction?
That's exactly what I call it. I wrote all through my life. I don't know that I finished anything until I was probably a teenager because it was for class, for school. There was a grade involved. And then pretty much off and on, I always considered myself a writer, somebody who liked to tell stories, but I don't know that I got very serious about it for a long time. I wrote in college where I had a little bit more luck because I had people who were interested in the stories. In my dorm, I was writing these stories that had people who lived in my dorm in the stories. And so it kind of got around that you could be in one of Lori's stories. And then I had people saying, well, where's my story? When are you going to write my story? And so I had, in a way, it's like a deadline imposed upon me. People would wonder, why are you down in the lobby watching TV when you could be writing stories? So I had an audience, too, which it's helpful. I was pretty prolific in that year. And then I wrote a little bit off and on until basically at age 29, I moved to Chicago, and I sort of accidentally for myself at all, which was not how I lived my life up until that moment. Everything was changing. I was engaged, getting married, new job, new city, and I just sort of accidentally stopped writing. And then I did get back to it, and I did that by basically through being jealous, being envious of a friend of mine from high school who had written and was publishing a book. And I was so happy for him, but I was so envious and thought, okay, this is how I'm going to get back to it. I'm going to try now.
Envy and jealousy are powerful things. And I, and I'll bet, I don't know you that well, but I'll bet that it was not so much envy of him as it was maybe a little disappointment in yourself that, well, back to that Beverly Cleary thing. Well, if Beverly can write a book, I can. Well, if my friend from college can do it, obviously I can. Was it kind of that little kick in the pants to, you know what? I know I can do this. I've just got to do it.
Things. Yeah. Yeah. Well, he had done the work. He had put in the time. He sat and he wrote and he went to school for it, and he sort of surrounded himself with this life that was going to feed stories. And I had gone into a very good career, but a career that was writing, but not a creative writing job. So I was using all my words for, the company I worked for, which is fine, but I also wasn't doing the work I needed to do. Yeah, kicking the pants is a good phrase.
It's really interesting that you were writing for your job and you were putting words to page, which probably helped to keep those muscles strong in you. But it is a different thing, isn't it? Writing all day, gets you to a certain point. But then you still have to take that other step to do the work for yourself.
You were talking about, I was writing all day with these writing jobs. Yeah, I was writing all day, but they were press releases, and I did some really fantastic articles for a medical magazine, but I was proud of that work. I'm glad I did that work, but I'm also, I didn't go home and then want to be in front of the computer anymore. I wanted to do something else. So it did not feed the creativity the way I needed it to. It used it all up, basically.
Yeah. At what point as a reader, and then maybe as a writer because of that, at what point did you become a fan of mysteries?
Well, this is interesting. So I did go back to school when my friend published this book. I thought, okay, I applied for and got into a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing on my own schedule, and I threw myself into it. So I started writing short stories. That's just a really quick way to get something finished,
right?
And get better over time. So I did that, and one of my stories got long, about 40 or 50 pages, and I was really confused by people in my workshop wanted more. They wanted more of this character and more of that, more of this, more. And I asked my teacher, how am I supposed to put all this more into a story that is already a beast, a monster of 50 pages? And she said, yeah, that's because it's a novel. Keep writing. So that's how I backed into writing a novel for the first time. And then right around that same time, I got accepted into a long weekend where you got put into a little small group of writers, and you worked together on your piece, and then got a chance to do some revisions and feedback from a professional, that kind of thing. It was fantastic. And when I arrived, there was a fiction group and a nonfiction group and a mystery group. And I had been assigned the mystery group. And this was shocking to me because even though I used to love Agatha Christie and Mary Higgins Clark when I was younger, I had not been really thinking of myself as a mystery writer, and I hadn't been reading in any, targeted way. It was a surprise to me. I was, as far as I knew, I was not writing a mystery. But the teacher was Karen Sparity, who's an Indiana mystery writer, a great writer, who said, oh, you think you're in the wrong group. Well, I read, your 15 pages that you submitted to this last night to help you today, and there's a crime in your first 15 pages. Are you going to solve it?
Ooh.
And if you solve it, it might be that you're writing a crime story. Maybe not, but it's possible. Just consider it. And that was the best thing that could have happened to me, because he cut so much time out of my process by pointing me in the right direction. Once you're writing a crime story, then so, okay, there's a shape to this. The story is crime happens to crime is solved. And that gave me enough, framework to start writing, to keep going, to finish.
Wow. So what did you think you were writing if you were not aware of the crime
a short story,
mystery?
Hank.
Yeah. I mean, was it a genre, or is this just I was just writing the people that popped into my head?
Yeah, I was writing, just a story, and it was fiction, and that's really all I knew. MFA programs are not always genre friendly.
Right.
Mine wasn't genre. It wasn't against you writing genre, but it wasn't set up for genre exactly. So they were just stories, mainstream.
More literary in nature.
Yes, I hear the air quotes in that word, and I appreciate that, because that's how I say it as well.
Yeah.
Literary.
Well, I just hate. I hate that. I hate that stories have to be one thing or another. And I know we need genre distinctions to know where to shelve the book. But then you have this other thing, and this is not any of those genres. This is real literature. And I just cringe when I hear that, but yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, they're just marketing terms. It's all about trying to get the book into the hands of the reader who will most enjoy it. Exactly. And like it and want to read it. I get that, and I think it's really useful in that way, but it's not so useful in some of the ways that people talk about genre, this division, as though there are, these stark lines between certain books, and in some ways there just aren't. There just aren't stark lines. There are maybe some grade lines.
Yeah.
It's hard to put anything in one category and leave it there.
Well, it does a real disservice to writers sometimes because when you think when a story is going a particular way and you're like, oh no, I have to, I can't use that trope because then nobody will know what genre this book is, and well, maybe sometimes a story is just weird. It just takes turns because life takes turns,
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So you're in the writing course. You discover that you're writing a mystery. Did you finish that story?
I did. Because I had that sort of framework. I don't know if I would have finished it otherwise. I don't know if I would have known how to finish it. But I did finish that draft in about 2 years. And then I had not been working full time when I was in my MFA program, and I went back to work. So I was working on it, revisions in my lunch hour and evenings and weekends. So probably about 4 years, just shy of 4 years total, I was working on that book. And then I finished it and I just knew it wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
So I put it in the drawer, the writing drawer that we all have. And I actually had a folder on my computer called the drawer.
Right.
And that's where
I love that.
That's where it went. And it lived there for probably 5 or 6 years. While I wrote and published my first 2 books. So the Black Hour, my first published book, was my second novel draft. Once I had sort of taught myself how to write with that first novel draft, the second novel draft was much more natural and much better and much stronger. So that's the novel that I got an agent with and got a contract with and was published by. And then I wrote Little Pretty Things, my second novel, and published that. And then when I turned in Little Pretty Things, that there's this moment where you decide, okay, the next thing I'm going to work on is, and I didn't really have a news story exactly in mind. There were options, but I thought, what I would love to do? I would love to see if I can save that first manuscript. So I dug it out of the drawer, rewrote it entirely, and it is The Day I Died, the book that was published in 2017.
Nice. So
the book that was a short story,
right? That exploded on you and turned into something else.
Exactly.
Let's talk about the Black Hour for just a minute, because this was the first book that you published, but also the first book after that learning novel. So, what was the start of the Black Hour like for you after you had kind of had the realization that if you're not a mystery writer, at least you know how to write that. And so did you approach that next book with the knowledge that, okay, this is what I can do. Let's start this from the beginning that way, or did it start like so many other stories for a lot of us do? That just is maybe a collection of characters or a situation that then grows into something. I guess what I'm asking is, did you write that book on purpose, or did it just was it just a story idea that grew into it?
I like this question because, the first book, having told you the story of the first book, you can tell I do things sometimes not on purpose.
Well, me too, so don't feel bad.
The Black Hour in some ways was on purpose. By the time I finished the first draft of the book that I put away, I was all in on mystery. I knew, okay, this is who I am. He was right. This is what I love. I love books with a mystery in them, often a crime. And I realized, oh wait, yeah, I used to read all these mystery novels. I love those. Why am I not reading that now? So I was all in, and I wanted to write a mystery novel. What I wrote was The Black Hour, and it did in some ways confuse people because it was not maybe a traditional mystery. But I definitely wanted to write that book, but on purpose, I don't know exactly if I can ever say that I've written a novel draft on purpose, because I really am the pantser, right by the seat of your pants end of the spectrum when it comes to planning a story. I started with a situation that there was a situation that did happen at the university where I worked at the time, but years and years and years before I worked there. And it was people's reaction to that story that had happened that I was really interested in. Why 20 years later are people making sure I know about this piece of information, this thing that had happened on university campus? because it was interesting. It was a campus shooting. Obviously, we face those a lot these days. This one had happened years before, and the survivor of that, a professor, did work at the university still, and people seemed to want to talk about that still. It was very gossipy, and so it was really that gossipy, the rumor mill generating, ideas all these many years later that was interesting to me. And I was thinking one day, I thought, what was that first day back like? Because that person went through, the worst occurrence, and then came back and kept teaching. And I thought that first day back, that's what's interesting to me, and that's where the story actually started.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. And so you wrote that book. How long did it take you to write The Black Hour?
I think it was a year and a half
Okay.
for the first draft. And then I spent an extra year, a whole year, working on revisions, just mostly myself, but a couple of beta readers, just really knuckling down on revisions until it was the best product I could make.
And what expectations did you put on the book? I'm always fascinated by the story before that book breaks out, because after that book comes out, then there's all these expectations with publishers and agents, and okay, well, now I have to write another book. I need to turn it in at a certain time, and I need to get on a schedule now. But before that, there are no schedules. Nobody even knows the book exists, outside of family and a couple beta readers maybe. But no one's expecting that book, really. So what expectations did you put on that book? And I know you revised for a year because you want it to be the best. So obviously you were hoping that this book, would get noticed by someone. But what were your expectations before all this happened to you?
I think in some ways my MFA program really helped me professionalize quicker than maybe I would have otherwise. I had this failed draft not in the drawer. And I wanted to start fresh, so that's where that story started. I wanted a new story to, spend my lunch hours on, and I wanted it published. I really did. I went through my MFA program to publish a book. I wrote this book, and it wasn't going to get published as far as I knew ever. And then I knew the story that I had started had legs. I knew that it felt like a story that people might be interested in. And so I wanted it published. And I think, I don't know, I feel like because of the failed novel, because I had, put it, and I didn't, even try to get an agent with it. I just put it away because I knew it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. And then when I started writing The Black Hour, I thought, okay, this feels right. This feels like I know a little bit better what I'm doing. Now that isn't exactly true because I was still pantsing it, and I still, wrote myself into a corner and fretted about it for three weeks, but until I knew how I was gonna finish the book. But I think something about having that experience in the MFA where they try to professionalize you and show you what the expectations of writing novels is going to be someday. And I read all the articles, and I read contemporary authors and read just everything, trying to figure out what a writing life looked like. I did have expectations for myself. I did want that book to be my first novel.
Gotcha. And it's that book obviously got noticed. You got an agent, you got a publisher, and all of your dreams came true, right?
I think some of them. I mean, that's bucket list stuff. I was checking off some of the big goals that people have. I got an agent within 3 weeks of submitting, which is a story that not everyone loves. But remember that year where I was revising, I made sure that by the time I sent it out, it was, a really finished book. So I got an agent, checked that off the list. Got an editor, a publisher interested, checked that off the list. A lot of those dreams that I'd had for so long, they got checked off. Not everything.
That's awesome. Let's talk about the new book, Under a Dark Sky. Before we started recording, you and I were chatting, and I told you that I've had the book for a couple of days now, so I haven't finished it yet, which I would would have loved to before we recorded, but I just haven't had time yet. But I'm a little better than halfway through it, and this book grabbed me from page one. I absolutely love what you're doing in this book. This is a little bit of a departure, I think, from your earlier books, in that there are kind of some supernatural elements to this book. Tell us how this story came to you, and maybe in telling that, what comes to you first when you start to think about a story? Do you get a character first? Do you get a setting? Is it maybe a plot point, and then things evolve out of that? How does that first inkling of the story come to you?
Well, I have to back up and say supernatural. No.
Well,
it's a dark place. So there's the feeling of maybe eeriness going on. But I know that Amazon has been putting me in the supernatural categories, and I was like, oh, someone's going to be disappointed by that someday. At some point, someone's going to be like, where is the ghost, Lori? There are no ghosts. So the story for this one started with location. I heard somewhere, probably maybe online, maybe a radio story, about a dark sky park being designated. And I had never heard that term before, so I researched it and learned about the International Dark Sky Association. Is an organization that works on light pollution, trying to control light pollution so that we can see the nighttime sky the way nature intended. And they give these designations away to preserves, very remote places that are kept dark, but also to state and national parks that work on controlling their light pollution so that they're artificial light, so that people can visit and see the nighttime sky. And so I was just fascinated. I thought, this sounds fantastic. I love this. And I researched to see if anybody had discovered this already and written a book about it. And as far as I know, no one has written a book set at a dark sky park specifically yet until me. So that's how that story started. In the past, I've started from different things. I started the Black Hour from that situation and that gossipy nature of a university campus. The little pretty things kind of came from two things. I really love the book Nickeled and Dimed by Barbara Ehrenreich. It's a nonfiction book about the working poor, how hard it is to get by in America on working class jobs. And so I had heard about a book that was described as nickeled and dimed murder mystery, and I thought, yes, that is up my alley. I'm really interested in that. Unfortunately, the job the person in that book had was not a working class job, in my opinion. I'd had dirty jobs in my life already. I used to work in a factory when I was in between school semesters, and I thought, well, that's not what I was promised. So I decided I'm going to write the nickeled and dimed murder mystery. And so that's what Little Pretty Things is a woman who works as a cleaner in a hotel, in a motel, really, and then gets involved in solving a murder of an estranged friend. So that was, and it was also a little bit about me. It was a little bit about thinking, what would I have done if I had not gone to college? What skills would I have had? What job would I have been able to have? And I don't know. I don't think I would be writing novels. Probably I wouldn't have the time. My grandmother was a cleaner, so I thought, it's possible that I might have been a cleaner somewhere. And then, of course, The Day I Died is this novel that was a short story from years past. So, every book has been different. The story starter is always a little different.
I love that you started from the premise of this dark sky park, because that kind of becomes a metaphor for what's going on with your protagonist, Eden, in that she has history there and she's terrified of the dark. When you started kind of getting the story thread pieces together for this, was it kind of an aha moment, like, oh, this is going to lend itself to to several different plot points or maybe different ways I can explore this character?
You make it sound so intentional, and yet we know.
I'm here to make you look good, Lori. I'm here to make you look good.
You are making me look good. So good. So smart. So I had the location, and then so I started thinking, well, who would wander into this space? What kind of baggage would she be dragging behind her? Who is she going to meet there? It all kind of came piece by piece. I was researching the Dark Sky Park aspect at one point, and so I used a certain park as my model, and they know it. They've heard by now. The Headlands International Dark Sky Park in Mackinac City, Michigan, is the nearest dark sky park to where I live in Chicago, and so I decided I'm going to borrow that park and write about it, so I can go there, I can research it, I can spend some time and learn some things. So I borrowed their park, and then I borrowed their website. I researched on their website, looking at the pictures that they posted and how they had, what kind of programs they ran and who works there and that sort of thing. And I noticed they had a guest house, and I was like, oh, I have to go stay there. And I haven't stayed there yet, unfortunately. But I was looking to see, okay, how much does it cost, to go to this guest house and stay for the weekend? And I couldn't figure out if it was by the person or if this was just a flat fee for the entire house. And I suddenly realized, oh, it's possible there could be a mix-up with the reservation. Someone reserves it thinking they're having the whole house when in fact they're getting just this suite and they have to share the space. So that's where, when I thought of that, that's when I could start writing. I could, start with the mix-up, get some strangers in a place together that is very dark, and see what happens.
Nice. How long did this book take you to finish?
This one was just about a year, I think, about a year and a month.
Okay.
I'm getting faster, but not really fast.
Does your publisher, or do they expect, a book a year from you, a book every 2 years? Do you guys have an understanding?
I don't know if we have an understanding. I had a 2-book contract for The Day I Died, and then an additional book after that. So this is my additional book after that. At one point, it was just known as Untitled Number 4. And it was sort of sold before I had any idea what it was going to be about, which is an interesting place to write from, sort of writing to a deadline, getting an idea to a deadline, which is, I think, the hard part. Right now I'm not under contract. I'm writing a book that I think my publisher will be interested in, but it's not time to talk about it yet. So, it's sort of a little more freeing, but I kind of expect a book a year out of myself. I think mystery is a book a year kind of genre. Not entirely. Some of our really great writers, they're a book every 2 years, every 3 maybe. But I thought I want to get as many books on the shelf as I can. That's how I can build a career out of this, is making sure that I have new books, and new books are very exciting to readers.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of genres tend to wax and wane in the with what the public is craving at the moment. Some years science fiction is really hot. Some years fantasy is really hot, and we want to read about hobbits and elves and stuff like that. And then, but mysteries are one of those rare genres that, even though some mysteries are hotter than others, there's always an appetite for these kinds of stories, and they never really go away in the way that maybe, post-apocalyptic teen stories do after we get, the 15th Hunger Games, derivative. But mysteries don't tend to do that. There's always something fresh going on, in mystery and thriller and stuff like that. Why do you think that is? What do you think it is about these kinds of stories that are kind of timeless, and that we keep coming back to these types of stories?
I will say I agree with you that mystery generally is always sort of on trend. There's always something new happening, and mystery readers are voracious. They can't get enough. That's why people write a book a year. Right. Their readers are disappointed otherwise. But I think it's because the framework of mystery is very open. It's just something happens and you want to figure out why it happened. That's all it is. So there's a broad category of books that have that framework that can be considered a mystery, or at least be pleasing to a mystery reader, even if it's not called mystery. But I do think there are trends in mystery. There are, flavors that are a little more popular than others.
Sure.
At times. I know I hate to call psychological suspense a trend because, of course, that's what I write. But it does seem like
it's kind of a trend
right now. There's just it's really just that's what people are really into is these these suspense stories that have unreliable narrators perhaps, or all is not what it seemed. It's just there's just a lot to enjoy about a story that has you have to figure your way out of it. It's like a puzzle.
And there's something.
I think.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, people love puzzles. I mean, I think that's I think that's something that is continuous, that has never changed. Is that people love to figure things out. They love to see if they can solve the crime along with the detective, and that's a different kind of story, obviously. But they like to read to find things out, and that's probably not going to ever change.
And there's something about living vicariously through someone that's crazier than you are.
Well, yeah. You hope. You hope they're crazier than you are.
You're like, whoo, okay, I thought my day was bad. Okay, now I can close the book on that and know that...
My problem seemed pretty small next to this person.
Yeah, exactly. And there's always, I think that we love, it's almost like riding a roller coaster sometimes. Like we want to go right to the edge, but not actually be in danger. We want to know maybe what it feels like without having to actually suffer through it. So reading about other people going through that is, it's a bit of an exhilaration, I think, and helps us sleep better at night knowing we're not living that life. Lori, I'm a super fan of what you're doing. I really love the new book, and I'm going back and picking up the other 3 books in your back catalog because I think you are my people, and so I love what you're doing. If people are just discovering you and your work, where can they find you online to maybe get plugged in and follow along and all that good stuff?
Sure, I'm at LoriRader.com. Sorry, that's LoriRader-Day.com. I just said my name wrong. It's early, Hank.
Drink some more of that tea.
LoriRader-Day.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. Any of those places.
Awesome. Lori, we're going to send everybody to come see you and to pick up a copy of the brand new book, Under a Dark Sky. It's also releasing an audiobook when it comes out, right?
It is audio, large print, and there's a hardcover library binding as well as the trade paperback.
Nice. And anyone listening, if you would like to get a free copy of the audiobook, you can go to audibletrial.com/Hank, sign up for a free membership, and you can choose a free book. And I would recommend you choosing Under a Dark Sky. I think that you will be pleasantly amazed by this book. Lori, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you so much, Hank. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
On the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving, Joey locked the doors of the Washington Irving Chapel and checked the windows from the outside, making sure that the cemetery offices were dark. Satisfied, he donned a knit cap and trudged uphill to the employee parking lot. He'd forgotten how desolate the grounds became at night. A fog had gathered, blurring the moon and stars. His rusty Volkswagen Beetle, christened Ladybug by Jason, sat in shadow alongside his dad's white van, which bore an image of the horseman and the cemetery's web address. Joey swept a palmful of condensation from Ladybug's windshield and fumbled for his keys. He heard a laugh, high and young. He froze. "Hello?" He shook off gooseflesh and found his key. He started the engine and backed out, headlights off, praying not to knock over a headstone, again. A child stood on the hillside amongst the graves. "You okay, kid? cemetery's closed." He turned on his headlights. The child vanished. Joey idled in the drive, frowning. What had just happened? He turned off the headlights and waited for his eyes to adjust. The silhouette reappeared. The child stood in the road now, blocking his way. He and the ghost stared at each other. He bit his tongue and squinted over the steering wheel. He couldn't resolve the ghost's features, only a tiny body in ruffles? Yes, a dress. A little girl with shoulder-length hair. The figure crouched, threw its arms over its head and skipped away. A giggle followed after. The ghost skipped up the hill, turned around, and beckoned through the fog. "Please come." Joey shook his head. No way. Ain't gonna happen. But he felt compelled to follow. What could a little girl do to him after all? He would keep a safe distance. The gravel sounded like soft rain beneath his tires. It drew him helplessly, past weeping cypresses and mausoleums blue with moonlight. He followed the giggle, the skipping ribbons, the little body made of shadow and quicksilver. The north end of the cemetery grounds rose to a steep wooded slope. The ghost had led him to Section 77, the northernmost boundary of the cemetery, but he'd lost her. He killed the engine, summoned his courage, and climbed out. The night air brought him fully awake. "Where are you?" he whispered, scanning the graves. A row of diseased hemlock trees stood at the fence line. Joey knew them well. They were dying, infested by some parasite called, he fished for the name, woolly adelgig. His crew had cut them back many times, lopping off limbs and heads, trying to save them. The hemlocks had grown back twisted and tormented. They stood as a row of grotesque sentinels guarding the threshold of the forest. The ghost climbed the slope, spun at the fence, and sat hugging her knees. The black mass of the Rockefeller State Park Preserve loomed behind her. "What do you want?" Joey whispered. "Play." He stepped forward, hands shaking. He just wanted to see her face, the face of a real ghost. To see the curve of her cheek, the sparkle that might have been her left eye. "Come and play, Joey." He froze. The sound of his name terrified him. She pointed over his shoulder. "Play with us." He turned and realized his mistake. He'd driven with his eyes on the girl, trying not to lose her, never looking behind. They had been followed.